Welcome to the Working with Subject Matter Experts podcast. If you're the lucky person responsible for keeping your business profitable into the future, you need to be a learning organization. So here at the Working with Subject Matter Experts podcast, we talk about managing organizational knowledge to keep your business strong. My name is Nathan Eckel. I am your co-host, and here we have with us the host of the Working with Subject Matter Experts podcast, Peggy Salvatore. How are you, Peggy?
I'm fine, Nathan. How are you today?
I'm doing great. And we're just looking forward to this episode today because we're going to be talking and we're going to be drilling a little deeper into that knowledge capture question that the entire book, Finding Your Subject Matter Experts, that whole book is really built around this topic and has all kinds of applications. But you have identified two critical questions for knowledge capture, and you talk about it in the beginning of the book on page 23. What are those two questions, and why are they so critical?
Well, the first thing is, before you start doing knowledge capture, because you're spending your valuable finite resources to do this, you want to make sure that what you're capturing, first of all, has lasting value. That's the most important thing. And the second thing is you need to ask yourself, what is worth spending the time and effort to preserve? So you have two pieces. Does it have lasting value, and is it worth preserving? Some things have lasting value, but in retrospect, you'll find that they might have historical value, but not have value for growing your organization and for having your organization meet the challenges of the future. I talk about this pretty much, if you've noticed, Nathan, in the podcast, because I'm of the opinion that the world is changing very, very quickly. Technology is it's exponential. The growth is exponential, and what's relevant today may not be relevant in 5 minutes from now. So I think a constant environmental scan is really important to make sure that you're spending your finite resources capturing something that's relevant to your future business. You know, think about cathode ray tubes. You know, somebody made a lot of money and then it was over. and that's true for whatever you're doing. Everything is changing. One of my favorite futurists that I follow, and I talk about him all the time, is Peter Diamandis. And if anybody wants a real eye-opener, he's got a great book called Bold. And he talks about the fact that the world is changing so quickly that things are being demonetized, meaning that things we used to pay a lot for, we get for free now. Things are being dematerialized, things that, I mean, we're living in the ether, really. He's got 6Ds. Those are two of the ones that they're affecting everything. So when you look at your business through this lens of doing a really comprehensive environmental scan and thinking like a futurist, you begin to realize that you might be capturing things you're not going to need a couple of years from now.
So this is great. So I'll just recap the bulk of, of what you said on those two questions, because it's a lot to digest. So we want to really tease this out so that whether you're leading an organization, whether you're the chief learning officer, whether you're governance for the organization, that you can easily and quickly retain and apply this stuff. So the first question, I'm actually going to reverse the order just because I'm thinking through this, and the first question is a value question. Is it worth capturing? Is it worth capturing? And I love that because as instructional designers, you know, Peggy, you know that the first real question is before you go and create a training program as a consultant or an employee, is you have to find out, is it really a skill that can be taught? Is there really a need to create a training program? Well, it's similar right here. There's all kinds of things you could capture, but is it worthwhile to capture this information? Any thoughts on that first question?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about, is it worth capturing? You know, you mentioned one of the first questions we ask as instructional designers, if we're brought in to develop training programs, develop a university for a corporation, for example. You're looking at one of our first questions when you do a needs assessment is to ask the question, is it training that you need? Is it training that's going to solve the problem you're trying to solve? So again, you're looking at what has lasting value. And that could be many things that you may or may not be able to capture formally, if that makes any sense. But you have to ask, what's of lasting value? Again, doing environmental scans and putting things through the lenses of where the world is going, where your industry is going. And then, is it worth the spending time and effort to preserve it? And those really are two different questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that lasting value piece, I mean, there's all kinds of ironies because, a big piece of your book, Finding Your SMEs, it's all about what you call shelfwear. And that's something that certainly is permanent, but it's not valuable anymore.
Exactly. And you can define it. What's shelfwear, Nathan? You know.
It's stuff that just sits on the shelf.
People spent millions of dollars. I have seen this. You have seen this. People spend millions of dollars developing training to solve problems that can't be solved with training. The training never gets used. It sits there. We've seen it. And again, I go back. You always talk about how cheap I am. I'm way too cheap to watch things like that happen. That just irks me.
Well, you're a person of value, adding massive value to other corporations and key leaders in those organizations, Peggy. And there's really nothing cheap about it other than the least expensive option, as we know. And here's the plug for the book. Buy the book. Buy the book. Apply the book. It's called Finding Your SMEs by Peggy Salvatore. It's all in there. And this is, I'm just going to riff on this for a moment, but I mean, it's like a continuum, because the knowledge that you don't capture, then it's gone. That's why the book's out here. That's why the whole training industry is out there, so that we can hopefully capture as much of that information as we can. And then on the other extreme, if it's uncaptured information that's gone, the other extreme of worthlessness or not usefulness is when it's just sitting there as shelfware, and maybe it's a software tutorial for DOS version 1.3 in 1982.
Exactly.
I mean, we know there are corporations that still have that stuff taken up, a cubic space in a closet somewhere. It needs to be all cleaned out. I mean, it's equally unusable, equal waste of time, energy, storage space. And really what you're proposing here, Peggy, is just a happy medium. It's not easy. It's not automatic. But if you want to be competitive, if you want to be number one in your industry, you've got to be a learning organization. And that means you hire people and onboard people with that expectation of learning and mechanisms, and most importantly, a culture of learning, so that they feel not obligated, but they want to share, they want to contribute, and they want to be part of the solution. What are your thoughts on that, Peggy? My little rant.
No, I think your rant was spot on. Really, it is about making sure when people are onboarded that we know that we share knowledge, and we know that there's job shadowing and doubling and mentoring and all these great things that allow organizations to survive and not be essentially held hostage to any one individual, or to any one division, or to certain things that got lost in translation, to making sure that you've got people doubled and tripled up, people mentored, really important stuff.
Yeah. So, well, and we're admittedly, Peggy and I in this conversation, and you listening from wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever your position is, we're admittedly opening up a whole can of worms here, which is that whole culture and onboarding piece. And that's something that we're going to be speaking to in the future. So we're kind of glancing over it today, but I think it's just so important, and it doesn't take much time to at least set your intention. If you're governing, if you're an executive, if you're a CEO, if you're a chairman of the board, or if you're right there in the trenches managing learning systems or designing training, at least you can set your intention to advocate for good practices when you're onboarding. You can be a leader no matter where you are in the organization. You can step up, you can promote, and you can be a champion for just good proactive practices in your conversations and in the influence that you wield no matter where you are. Peggy, last word for you, and then we're going to wrap up.
I'm really very happy to hear you talk about the onboarding piece, and it just gives me a chance to wrap up on one particular point having to do with people, introducing people into your culture, making sure they know it's a learning organization, and that means in a way that everyone's sharing, and think of it in terms of a flattened organization. Some of the organizations that are the most inefficient and the most in danger of going out of business when they don't share are ones that have very strict hierarchies, where you don't have the supervisors who can talk to the directors, who can talk to the vice presidents, because everybody is so stuck in their little corporate niche and protecting their little fiefdoms that they're not sharing. And there is tremendous danger in that, because there is a lot of knowledge in an organization that doesn't get shared because it doesn't cross that firewall. So onboarding and having that expectation going in is very important.
So stay tuned, folks at home and at work and in the car right now, because we're definitely going to explore that on a future podcast episode for sure. Let me just wrap up, because we've covered a number of different things. This podcast was actually about the two critical questions for knowledge capture, and those questions are, number one, will it last? And number two, is it worthy of being captured? So I'm wishing you the best. Peggy's wishing you the best. This has been the Working with Subject Matter Experts podcast. And tune in for the next one, where we talk about two different scenarios, two different cultures, and it's kind of a fun word picture that we're going to be throwing out in terms of two different culture and which one are you. So we'll see you on the next one.